Well, hi everybody. Welcome to all the newcomers and the old timers and everyone in between. My name is Melissa C. I'm a recovered compulsive overeater. I live in New York, and this topic that we're going to talk about tonight, sponsorship, is really near and dear to my heart because it's an essential component to getting well. And, if you're new here and you're thinking, or you're new in recovery or you're starting over again, you might think, okay, this doesn't apply to me. Well, it absolutely does apply to you because you are going to sponsor. Like if you mean business, if you think you're here because you want to get well, there there's this isn't optional, and if that's a scary, prospect right now, my understanding is, and my experience is, when you have a true spiritual experience and awakening, the desire, the craving to help another person, it's undeniable. You just feel it. And I've seen it happen again and again for people. They say, like, I'm like, I want to help somebody. I want to send someone my way. And so, I'm going to start off with Dr. Bob's Nightmare. On page 181, it says, I spend a great deal of time passing on what I learned to others who want and need it badly. I do it for four reasons. So we have four reasons why we do it. One, sense of duty. Two, it is a pleasure. Three, because in so doing, I am paying my debt to the man who took time to pass it on to me. And four, because every time I do it, I take out a little more insurance for myself against a possible slip. So it is our duty, our responsibility. And I feel like I could not live with myself if I didn't help another person, try to save her life, try to get a relationship with God so that her life can be spared from this disease. And, I believe in this because this saved me from the gates of death. It says that in the doctor's opinion that we give because we believe in ourselves and still more in the power, right? God, um, that saved us from the gates of death. So, and it is a pleasure, a true joy, and a calling. Um, and we repay the person or people. For many of us, it took a community. I had many sponsors along the way, and I owe each and every one of them, my service, not to them, but to the new person coming in. Um, and if all those other reasons aren't reason enough, because it keeps us sober, because it keeps us abstinent. Um, in page 89, in Working with Others, it says practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. It works when other activities fail. This is our 12th suggestion. Carry this message to other alcoholics. You can help when no one else can. You can secure their confidence when others fail. Remember, they're very ill. So, I want to talk about this having immunity notion, and if we think about the immunization, and all, think about illnesses, an immunization is an injection that keeps us actually very close with the disease. When you get immunity, they inject you with a form of the disease. You're very close, intimate contact with it, and you're capable then, your body, of making the required antibodies so that you can fight off this disease. And I would say that it's pretty similar how it works with compulsive eating and working with others. I need to have close, intimate contact, intensive, intimate contact with the still sick and suffering. And then And I think here's the other thing: we're reminded that people are sick. That people, when you're sponsoring someone and you're helping somebody, we're supposed to remember that they're sick. They're not bad. They're not weak. And they're not beneath us. They're not beneath you, right? And then Janet said, like the last time, the only thing that maybe I might have compared to the person that I'm helping with is I came to this maybe a little bit earlier, right? Or I was able to reach that spot a little bit earlier than they are, but certainly not any better than any other person here. And we have to remember that when we're sponsoring people, that we are equals, that, we're not superior to anybody. Um, even though we might be the ones giving direction, you know, we are still not the director, right? We're supposed to be seeking God and let God really direct us in channeling what we would believe God would have us be, do, and say so that we can help other people. That it's not our own power that we're like spewing on to people, but really we're a channel. We're receiving it and then helping. Um, in the doctor's opinion, to sort of emphasize that, you're going to have to do this, right? As part, it says in XXV, as part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. This has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. This man and over 100 others appear to have recovered. And and then again in the chapter Working with Others on page 94, it says it is important for him to realize that your attempt to pass this on to him plays a vital part in your own recovery. Actually, he may be helping you more than you are helping him. So this working with other people, it's interesting that it's discussed right in the doctor's opinion, because that's usually the first thing we kind of sit down and crack open together. And so, it's sort of like when, not sort of like, it is like when I start working with a new person, right off the bat, I need to lay out the terms of our agreement. What is going to be the payment, right? Certainly nothing for me, but right in the first conversation, we are to impress upon them, make it clear to them that when they get well, they will help others. There's no point in doing this if it stops with that person, right? Because we are a part of a rapidly growing fellowship. Um, and so we remain recovered, we get restored to sanity. Sponsoring is not optional, right? Um, and it says here that we work at our solution on the spiritual as well as the altruistic plane. We favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who's very jittery, befogged. More often than not, it is imperative that a man's brain be cleared before he is approached, as he has then a better chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer. And then on XXVII, it says, of course, right, someone ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor, and this often requires a definite hospital procedure, right, before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. So, okay, so our program, it's spiritual and altruistic, unselfish, philanthropic, self-sacrificing. Um, but we're told you got to put you have to like let go of food. And now it doesn't say to leave people alone, go off, get abstinent. You found out you're powerless. Awesome. Here's your food plan. Go get abstinent and call me in 3 days. Now, I know that there are some there are some people who work it that way, but I'm going to spell out, this is our sponsorship workshop. So I'm going to spell it out the way that I see it, the way that I interpret it, and the way that I understand it. When someone is hospitalized, They're given care. They're not sent and banished to an island alone. They're actually given support, given a room, given a cozy bed, given treatment, given support, given help, given parameters. So I'd say, like, from my experience and many people I've worked with, we were not put into treatment programs. Some people are, some people do go into treatment, um, but I wasn't. Many people that I work with don't go into treatment, but I would say, as a sponsor, you can absolutely help somebody create their own hospitalization, their own safe space. And I believe that part of my work as a sponsor is to offer assistance to a fellow in getting clean. Here are the things that we do, right? We help them identify maybe their problem foods or maybe some of their problem behaviors. We help them in that sense. And then as part of this hospitalization period, we help them remove all the distractions that might tempt them, all the things that are going to get in the way. So if you're in the hospital, you're not going on vacation, you're not going out for dinner, you're not taking up a new dance class or a new hobby. It's not the time to sign on to be the PTA president mom right in the midst of hospitalization, or to be the cookie mom if you're in Girl Scouts. Like, you're in the hospital, do not under any thought think that you're going to sign up to be in charge of the candy fundraiser. Like, just not very smart. And you're not going out to dinner, you're not making big life-changing decisions, right? You're not really supposed to do that if you're in the hospital. um and I tell people, if going food shopping is too enticing, then while you're in the hospital, you don't go, right? You order it, you have it delivered. If need be, you ask a friend to help you. And if nobody else, like right now, you can actually order it all online and pull up curbside, right? And just pick it up. Um, you can also, if none of those are viable options, you can go with a list, and a sponsor can either FaceTime you while you're in the supermarket. I've done that with people. Or you can find fellowship, support, like what was discussed here, reaching out to people who will actually hang out with you in the supermarket while you're FaceTiming and just walk up and down the aisles with you. Now, I want to say that our solution is not to live that way forever, right? The idea is to get out of the hospital and then to get on with the business. Actually, the idea is to get out of the hospital, get well, and then help others. And maybe help others who might need hospitalization as well. And then we help them get out, right? So it's not the way the newcomer's going to have to live always. But it's crucial that they understand that the main focus right now is on their recovery, is on getting clean, and is on getting a relationship with God. It's got to come numero uno, number one, before anything else. You know, I in Bill's story on page 9, it says, fresh skinned and glowing. So here's going to be a little bit of directions for, if you're a sponsor, how you should show up, right? Fresh skinned and glowing, starry eyed look, but he did no ranting, and the result was self evident. It worked, right? So if you're carrying the message, and this was describing Ebby, this is what drew Bill in. Bill saw Ebby and he knew, here's a guy who was a drunk just like him, but he showed up and he looked healthy and he looked well, and his like eyes were alight, and he didn't rant at him. He didn't preach and he didn't rant, but his deportment, the way that he looked, the way that he appeared, the way that he sounded was self-evident, right? It was more powerful than his words. was the way that he appeared. So I would say, as a sponsor, if you're carrying the message, look like a message, sound like a message. If you're choosing to sponsor, if you're choosing a sponsor, right? If you're somebody who's here and who's like, I'm not up to sponsoring yet, but I need a sponsor, look for someone who appears to have been transformed. Look for someone who seems pretty happy, joyous, and free, not just skinny, right? I mean, you want to find somebody who looks happy in their release, um, and no ranting, self-evident. I think like all throughout my life, I had a lot of people. They were not my sponsors. They were just people who loved me, who would tell me how I was killing myself. You're killing yourself, and you should do something about it. But the people that wound up helping me, that became my sponsors, and for those of us, right, we're going to sponsor, um, that wasn't the message that I grabbed onto. The message that I grabbed onto were people who said, I was killing myself and I'm not anymore, right? And they looked like they were alive and they sounded passionate about these steps. And I could hear that they had had a profound spiritual experience. I want to make a point here too that all throughout Bill's story, he makes a point of calling Ebby my friend, right? Ebby was his friend. And on page 12, paragraph 2, it says, despite the living example of my friend. And on page 13, paragraph 5, it says, my friend promised when these things were done, I would enter a new relationship with my Creator. Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility are essential requirements. So, his friend told him that this is about getting a relationship with the Creator. Um, and it's also talking about him as a friend. Now, also in the chapter Working with Others, it says on page 94, if your talk has been sane, quiet, and full of human understanding, you may have perhaps made a friend. And then it goes on to say, offer him friendship and fellowship. Tell him that if he wants to get well, you will do anything to help. And, the reason I highlighted all those, and by the way, there are 16, I believe, times that the word friend is mentioned in the chapter Working with Others. So they were friends, and we're supposed to be friendly. I say as a sponsor, um, you're supposed to be friendly with the person that you're helping. That this is the language of the heart that we speak. Remember, we're not above anybody. We just came to this scene maybe a little bit earlier, maybe a beat ahead of them. Um, you don't need to teach and guide someone in a position of superiority, right? Um, it's supposed to be shoulder to shoulder, not above, right? So I have to say that I do hear sometimes this I'm not your friend line. And I say, like, let's go back to this idea that, remember, they're very sick. Well, we're talking about sick people, not criminals. And sick people are certainly more than worthy of my friendship, right? Um, and I want to say sometimes when we begin to work with people, they're displaying a lot of the symptoms of this illness, right? Which is selfishness is the root. So all the symptoms, they're not pretty. And it might be hard to begin a friendship with someone. I know what I was like when I came in, full of self pity, riddled with self pity, so self centered. Every time I opened up my mouth, it was like, well, you don't know how that makes me feel. And I was like, I was a prisoner to my feelings. It was, I would, every time my sponsor would ask me something, I always started out with like how upset I am and how this one is doing this and that one is doing that. And that's not a fun friendship. Of course it's not a fun friendship, but she still offered me her friendship and her support. And because those were the symptoms of sickness, right? That was the that was the that was the way that my illness appeared. So we don't need to teach somebody from a position of superiority, and we're supposed to be patient, kind, and patient. On page 14, paragraph 6, it says, my friend had emphasized the absolute necessity. Particularly was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me. If an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. So, imperative, again, not optional. And it says through self sacrifice. Isn't that interesting? That it's through self sacrifice, not through knowledge, not just through knowledge, but through sacrifice, through giving of ourselves, inconvenience, should pinch a little bit. We're going to have trials, we're going to have low spots, and being recovered does not mean that our lives are going to be challenge free, right? Page 16, most of us feel we need to look no further for utopia. We have it right with us right here and now each day. My friend's simple talk in our kitchen multiplies itself in a widening circle of peace on earth and goodwill to men. So, my friend's simple talk. Okay, here's more direction. My friends talked to me simply, right? And it's a beautiful widening circle. It's such a thrill, I have to say, to find out sponsees who are sponsoring and their sponsees are sponsoring and their sponsees are sponsoring too. And that's what gives us utopia. Not perfect lives, right? But this self-sacrifice that leads to this widening circle. Um, on page 18, it says, paragraph 4, but the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who is properly armed with facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic within a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. Okay, that the man who is making the approach has had the same difficulty, that he obviously knows what he's talking about, that his whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that he is a man with a real answer, that he has no attitude. So here's more direction: no attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatever except the sincere desire to be helpful. But there are no fees to pay, right? So we can't charge anybody. No axes to grind, right? No big like issues that I feel like have to like make sure that you know. No people to please, no lectures to be endured. These are the conditions we found most effective. So it talks here about these facts. So what are you armed with? What are the facts that you're armed with? You know, um, and when people say, I don't know that I'm qualified to sponsor, well, if you've had a spiritual awakening, you are, right? And you have all the facts you need. You don't need to know the book forwards and backwards. Sometimes people say that, like, I don't know everything in the book. Great, you're not asked to. The facts that you're supposed to be armed with are the facts about yourself. Like, you are the expert in you, right? Um, Not facts about what page to find a certain passage or facts about Bill and Ebby. If that's an interest and if it's helpful, then my experience is that God will help you perfect your knowledge. My own personal knowledge about the book has grown, multiplied, and tripled with each person I worked with. every time I opened up the book with another person, I learned more, right? And every time I didn't know the answer to their questions, which is often, I'm not an encyclopedia, right? So when I don't know an answer to a question, here's a tip for you guys as sponsors. The right answer when you're asked a question and you don't know the answer to is, gee, I don't know, right? Because we're honest. Gee, I don't know. Let's crack open the book and find out together, right? Let me look. Or if it's something that's way beyond my scope, my favorite answer is, have you taken it to prayer? Right? Let's put this in prayer. Why don't you pray about it? You know, because nobody's expected to be God. Only God has all the answers, right? Only God has all the answers. So that's always my go-to line, right? Um, we our demeanor will show that we have a real answer and we're not pretending to be superior. All we want is to be helpful. Do not lecture. It's really clear here. Don't lecture. You can be an amazing sponsor without knowing every single passage in the book. Page 19, it says, none of us make a sole vocation of this work. All of us spend much of our spare time in the sort of effort which we are going to describe. So we do spend much of our spare time. It's interesting. I've been asked recently, by people, so what are your hobbies? What do you like to do? And people on the outside world, I mean, it's sort of like I have to laugh. What do I like to do? I like to work with compulsive overeaters. That's what I like to do. That is my pastime. That has become a passion for me. It's my favorite hobby of all. I love reading the book. I love studying the book. I love being useful. I love being helpful. I have a job. I happen to love most aspects of my job, so I'm fortunate. And I'm able to make enough of a living doing my job. Um, and I love this. It says that a few of us are fortunate enough to be so situated that they can give nearly all their time to the work. And I laughed because I was asked recently from someone, they were like, oh, how many years left do you have to retire? And I told them, and they said, oh, so you'll still go on and work after that. And I was like, I want to work with compulsive overeaters. That's what I can't wait till I can retire that I can do this. I hope to be that fortunate. On page 97, it says, helping others is the foundation stone of your recovery. A kindly act once in a while isn't enough. You have to act the Good Samaritan every day if need be. So, as a sponsor, it's important to let new people know too that helping others, if it's the foundation stone of their recovery, it means that the rest of their recovery has to be built upon helping people. It can't come at the end. That's the roof, right? So in the beginning, we have to start being helpful. We have to start giving help wherever we can, in any way, because that's going to help us build our foundation. Um, and it's not like, oh, once in a while we do nice things for people, but it becomes part of who we are, how we are. Um, you know, you're going to have to figure out how to do this while still working, right? Most of us are going to have to figure out how to still do this while having a job. And working with others is not convenient. It's not said to be convenient work with others. In fact, remember, immunity is intensive work with others. Intensive. And I say, like, when you're worried about, well, how am I going to fit this in? You know, um, my disease was not convenient either. Binging was not convenient. Um, my compulsive overeating never cared about the time it took me away from my interests. Didn't matter. It demanded fidelity. The food in my life demanded that I place it above everything else, right? Um, So you cannot recover if you think you're going to fit this into your pre-existing life. It doesn't work like that. Um, and you can't remain recovered if you think now that your step work is done, oh, good, I finished my step work, check. I'm out of the hospital, check. Um, now I won't have anything hard to do anymore, right? Not true. Um, in fact, when people fall down and people, have a relapse, oftentimes it's that they weren't working intensively with other people. They were sort of doing it conveniently at times. Um, Page 19 through 20, it says, most of us sense that real tolerance of other people's shortcomings and viewpoints and a respect for their opinions are attitudes which make us more useful to others. Our very lives as ex problem drinkers depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. So, sponsees are going to have shortcomings. Their views will be different. Treat them with respect. Meet them where they're at. And I love this. It says that we will help meet their needs, not fill their needs. Their needs will be filled from God, but we will meet them where their needs are. Um, More about alcoholism on page 31. It says, we do not like to pronounce any individual as alcoholic, but you can quickly diagnose yourself. And in the chapter Working with Others on page 91, it says, describe yourself as an alcoholic, right? When you're working with another person, you describe yourself as the compulsive overeater alcoholic. Page 92, it says, and be careful not to brand him as an alcoholic. Let him draw his own conclusions. And then it continues and says, continue to speak of alcoholism as an illness, a fatal malady. Talk about the conditions of body and mind which accompany it. Keep his attention focused mainly on your personal experience. So don't diagnose anyone. Do not pronounce anyone else a compulsive overeater. And I think this is part of the immunization for us. I'm constantly, when working with others, I'm constantly saying over and over again, I'm a compulsive overeater. My disease, my disease, my disease. Now, remember, I don't have any mental defense anyway. It's not that I can forget or remember, but I need a very intimate relationship with my disease, right? So, in the intimate relationship with my disease, is I constantly say and admit who I am and what I have, who I am and what I have. And it's not my job to convince someone that they're licked, right? That is not the job of a sponsor, to tell someone to give them warnings about where they're headed, about any of it. But it really is the job of the food and all their failed attempts, all their own failed attempts. I'm just keeping an eye on the time because I want to make sure I have time for questions, and there's an awful lot here. So I think I'm going to stop at, I'm going to just maybe just a drop more and then I'll stop. It says here on page 88, into action, it says, faith without works is dead. Um, and so I can have all the faith in the world. And if I don't work with others, if I don't do this intensive work with others, my faith is dead. It means nothing. And I think about it like this: I have a car in the garage. I have faith that tomorrow my car is going to take me to where I need to go, right? But if I don't get in the car, I'm staying home, right? If I actually don't get in the car, put the key in the lock and turn it, right? I'm not going anywhere. And it's the same thing with this idea of having faith. I can have all the faith in the world. But if I don't work, if I don't work with other people, if we don't help other people, our faith is dead. It doesn't mean anything. Um, so I'm going to stop there and pick up the next time.